Thank you once again for joining for this webinar on communicating with impact. My name is Noel Museshi Murunga. I work with the Brave Movement. I serve as the advocacy officer, responsible for the work in Africa. And I'm really glad that we are able to have this conversation. And as we were looking at what to do, what to say during this webinar, we just didn't want it to be like, me giving you, but I hope you'll be able to share your perspectives also. The chat box is open. We may not be able to, give our opinions real time, but please feel free to chime in the chat box. If you notice there's something that you know and you want to let everyone know, please feel free. And even as I do this webinar, I'm looking forward to also learning and growing with you. So a very warm welcome to the session. And I think we'll begin the webinar. On the other end, I have my colleague with me, Kaylan, who will be supporting with the technical bit. So yes, let's get onto it. Today, we're going to look at communicating with impact. Many times we do a lot of advocacy work and we aim to create an impact. We aim to talk to stakeholders and ensure that they're able to understand our goal. We talk to communities. Some of us work with communities, and the end goal is for them to understand what we're talking about and to join us. So how are we able to then communicate this thing that is very important to us in a manner that actually makes sense to them and actually makes them want to be part of it? This is what we're going to look at. So as we move on to the next slide, we'll just have a brief overview of the specifics we'll cover. Next slide, please, Kayla. And we might not be able to cover everything when it comes to communicating with impact, but today we're going to look at why communicating with impact is important. We're going to look at understanding your audience. There's so many people we're dealing with, crafting effective messages, storytelling for impact, something that I really, really love, storytelling for impact. Then we're going to have a conclusion and next steps. So as I said earlier, please feel free to use the chat box to chime in as we have an interesting deliberation. Thank you, Kaylan. So part of our introduction, as we move on to the next slide, will be a short video. So Kaylan will play for us a short video, then we can get into the subject matter.
Go, Piper! Go, baby, go! 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 Woo! Stop! Babies, Piper! Baby, you won! Piper! Piper!
Yes. Thank you so much, Kaylan, for playing that video. One time when I was, just a few days ago, I was on LinkedIn and I was just looking at the update and I came across this video. So it was a very, very proud parent who was cheering on their baby, their girl during, I think they had like a school Olympics or something like that. So Piper had the dad cheering her on and she started running. She continued running until she forgot that she had won the race. So she got to the finish line and she continued running. And the dad was like, okay, now you won the race, please stop. And as I reflected on that, I was like, very interesting. I mean, the dad was very impactful in his communication, really encouraging Piper to go. So Piper just had the voice of the dad, and what came on upon her is, I need to go, I need to run. And eventually she ran and she won. I believe probably she's a marathoner, so to speak. So this is just one instance where this parent was able to communicate with impact. And Piper was able to move and to ensure she won. But then again, I asked myself the question, she ran and she even, she did not know where to stop. So do we go back? Was the parent communicating enough for her to understand that, okay, fine, you've already won the the race, and you need to, stop now and take a break? So how are we able to communicate balance between ensuring that people have the message and people do what is expected so that we don't get other anticipated outcomes and we start remedying that. In this webinar, we are basically going to look at some of these things. So as we move on to the next slide, we're going to have an introduction really of why it is important to communicate with impact. Next slide, please, Kaylin. Yes. All of us have something that is important to us, whether you're working in the child protection space, ending sexual violence like me and some of my colleagues, or whether you just want this supermarket or this store to have this particular product that you want. Could be a shower gel, or whether you want the government to ensure that there is, for example, free education for all. We are working towards having something. So how do we get to a point where we're able to tell this story and the people who are responsible for taking action are able to understand it clearly and take action as needed? The first thing we're going to look at is communicating with impact helps us to build trust and credibility with stakeholders, because we're told that I alone cannot change the world, but you can cast a stone upon the waters and create a ripple effect of change, something that Mother Teresa said. So as Noel, for example, I'm not able to ensure that all the governments in Africa actually end childhood sexual violence. But then if I'm able to collaborate and I'm able to build trust with those of us who are like-minded, as we go to the government will be able to see that there's some bit of credibility in this. So if you're able to build trust and credibility, then you know that your advocacy message or whatever that you're bringing across will be listened to more. The next reason why we need to communicate with impact is it demonstrates your organization progress towards its mission. Some of us who've joined the webinar work in the child protection space. And for example, now we're coming from the VAC Ministerial Conference, and we want governments to commit to ending violence against children. And if you're able to communicate to these governments, this is the impact that you've done as an organization or as consortium of organizations, then we're able to build momentum. Progress is more sustained as compared to if Brave Movement was working alone, or if another organization was working alone. Together, we're able to create impactful messages that are able to bring the government on board. The other reason why it is important to communicate with impact is that communicating with impact, the next slide, please, Kaylin. It helps to strengthen relationships with funders and policymakers. Before someone decides that they're putting their money on something, they really need to understand and to buy into what you're talking about. So if you're able to explain to this funder or to this donor what you're doing in articulate ways, and not just articulately, but you're able to pull them into the vision, then you're able to strengthen relationships and you're able to get more funding for what you're doing. The other reason why we need to communicate with impact is that the next slide, please, Kayla. It empowers advocacy by showing results. So many of us have done, many times we do a lot of impactful advocacy work, but because we are not able to show this work, then someone will not be able to tell that actually, for example, in North America, such and such a thing is happening. So even when you go out and you say, I've been working with young people to end maybe violence against children, and this has not been communicated in a manner that the external audiences are able to understand, then unfortunately you'll be this one person who has a lot of potential, but then they've not been able to package it or put it in a manner that people are able to see. So for us to do advocacy, many of us sometimes, let me speak from the Africa bit, many of us tend to say that I'm doing a good job, I don't need to put it on social media, or I do not need to package it, I do not need to share it. We forget that many times the way you present this information enables people to see the advocacy work that you're doing. And as people see this advocacy work that you're doing, then they're able to bring more support. So it is important for us to communicate with impact, especially for those of us who are working in the social impact space. So now that we've understood why it is important to communicate with impact, we're going to look at understanding your audience. Why is it important to know speaking to policymakers should be done in this manner? Speaking to maybe parents and caregivers should be done in this manner. And as we move on to the next slide, we'll find that it is very, very important to tailor your message to specific audiences. When advocacy and activism was starting, let me give an example of where I come from. I'm based in Kenya. The goal was to drive the message home. If we wanted the government to do a specific impact work, for example, ending childhood sexual violence, the goal was to ensure that the message was out. So there are so many things that we would be able to do. We would be able to go to the streets and, do peaceful protest. There's also the opportunity of bringing our policymakers together and speaking to them. But then we came to a point where we realized, one, it is important to coordinate all our efforts together and tailor these messages depending on the different people. Because if you look at the theory of change, the change continuum, depending on what matter is you're focusing on, you will notice that you're part of the change continuum. There's so many other stakeholders who are there. So it is very important for you to tailor your message to specific audiences. Perhaps stakeholders, policymakers would love to hear how your message links up with the manifestos, the agenda, how your policy links up with the laws of the land that are already there. Mufanda will want to know what kind of impact will be created, what will be the reach for this advocacy work that you're doing. So as you go to these different people, the community will want to know how it will support the growth of the community. So we won't go to them with technical jargons, but we'll go in a language that they understand. That's the first thing. Understand your audience, tailor the message to that specific audience. The second bit is to identify their values, their priorities, and their concerns. And in the international development space, we are moving to a kind of participatory approach of development, where we have these key people who are supposed to be reached with the information. They're the ones who are actually decision makers. We sit down with them and they're able to explain this is the gravity of the solution and these are the problems. And as they do this, they're able to come up with solutions that are related to their values. Many times we may mean well, we may want to introduce changes, but we may go to maybe a region in Latin America and what is acceptable in Africa may not be acceptable there. So it is really important to identify their values. And many times we may not agree with their values, but as an effective communicator, it is important to respect people's values. And if you're really trying to create change, see, can this change be accommodated within their values? And finally, we have tools that you can use, because we're living in a digital age, and thank God for artificial intelligence that's making things simpler. You can use surveys, you can have meetings, you can even have research, which will support you in understanding your audience and their specific needs so that you're able to tailor the message. Next slide, please, Kaylin. And for this particular bit, we just try to, just give an example of policymakers and funders. The language you will use with policymakers and funders is different with community members. So with policymakers and funders, imagine you're going to speak to your local elected, let me say, representative in Parliament or Senate. One, you will need to, because this is a more technical space, you will need to understand, one, the laws and the policies that are already in place. You need to be educated, you need to be empowered, and you need to speak their language. They need to see that, Noel understands what I want. Because at the end of the day, these are policymakers, these are people who have an agenda. So are you there to help in strengthening and supporting what they're doing, or introducing something that may not be part of the agenda that will support that? So with policymakers and funders, just key things, some key pointers. Align your impact with policy goals. Policymaker will not support you if you're contrary to what the policy goals are. You use evidence-based data, and that's what we're moving in, evidence-based data. When you go to the boardroom, for example, and we're talking about sexual violence, you have the data and the statistics. 1 in 4 girls undergo sexual violence, and this is the gravity of the situation. And many times the policymakers may not understand the gravity until you paint that picture. And when it comes to evidence-based data, it would be best to simplify that data in a manner that makes sense. Sometimes we want to put the heavy research we have done because we've invested in heavy research, but many times just using the very simple statistics, 1 in 4 girls, 90% of girls out of this population in Africa, out of this population in Europe, it is easy for them to understand and it paints a picture for them and they're able to see that. However, also as in our efforts to use data, it is very important for us not to overdo with the data, use very tough research jargon that they don't understand. We'll just take them in a spiral and we may end up losing we may not be able to communicate that impact to them. Then build relationships by offering relevant solutions. Sometimes we don't even, for example, we may not like a specific policy maker, but you have to build a relationship with them, a professional relationship with them as you offer solutions. You may not have a personal liking about their values, but it's very key. They are the solutions. So how can we navigate around this so that we're able to work together? And of course, partnerships to amplify policy impact. We've really been talking about working together, not working in silos, policymakers and funders. That would be the way to go, some of the pointers. In terms of community members, we are very different and diverse people. Accessible and inclusive language is key. Remember to respect culture. Sometimes you may not agree with the culture of the people, but we have to respect their culture. Many times development comes from a top-down approach, but we need to move from a bottom-up approach where we look at what is this community, what are their values, what matters to them, and how can we integrate this as we create the change. So respect for culture is quite important. And share stories that resonate with your audience. You can build trust through transparency and regular updates. Many times I have seen that happen, and I have also I have done that, maybe inadvertently. We bring together communities, we initiate this project, or we do some research with the community. Then once we have gotten the data, we disappear from the communities. We never get back to these communities and actually tell them that the prevalence of sexual violence has been this and this. So these communities need that kind of accountability, provide regular updates. This is how far we are. Many times we get this data and we present them in high-level meetings, in the UN meetings, and these communities that are part of it don't even have this information, or if they do, they don't have the interpretation of this message to a point where they can understand. So let us always remember to build trust through transparency and regular updates, and use calls to action to encourage involvement and feedback. This is really just a quick example of how we would speak to community members and policy makers and funders as we move on to the next bit. Yes, in terms of audience engagement, would be very important. Let me give an example of this webinar. Unfortunately, today we just have a one-way bit of interacting, so it is me speaking. But in places where we can interact with people, would be nice for them to have that interaction. Let it not be about us as change makers, speaking and giving and forgetting them. So audience engagement is very key. And for you to do that, the first thing that is important for you to understand is to know your brand. Be clear about your brand identity and values. Be clear about what you're doing. Are you ending childhood sexual violence? That should be the lingo in your mouth. Don't say, oh, we're ending childhood sexual violence and we have this other initiative. Just be very clear. Someone will remember that clear messaging that you gave. What is your identity? What are your values? For example, if I am just going to quickly ask, when you see the Brave movement, what comes to mind? Is it the blue and the pink colors that we have? Is it the values that we have? Is it the thematic areas we focus in? Prevention, healing, and justice. So know your brand. If you're woken up, like Noel, wake up in the middle of your nights while you're sleeping, you should be able to just in 2 sentences clearly articulate your brand and your objectives. The second bit, as we move on to the next slide, and audience engagement. you need to know your audience. We've really talked about this in terms of their interests, their preferences, their behaviors. And I cannot emphasize enough, culture is important. We're very diverse people with beautiful cultures, and it's very important. And culture is a double-edged sword. There's some cultural values that may be retrogressive, and there are some that actually strengthen the community. So as people who want to communicate with impact, before we just enter a community, would be good to know what are some of the cultural values that are progressive, can we leverage on them? And what are some of the cultural values that are retrogressive? Remember, your goal as you communicate with impact is not to change even that which is retrogressive. Your goal is to communicate this impact and let this communication then stir up the audience to now see perhaps we need to do that. But if you really carry it that you're the one who's supposed to create the change, then a lot of frustration will come in. The third bit that we need to look at is interactive content. We get very bored as human beings. Our attention span can be quite, depending on our ages and our level of activity and different things, we get very bored and tired at different points. So it's sometimes very difficult. And I guess that's where the challenge comes in, but create interactive content. Use graphics if you can use graphics, use illustrations if you can use illustrations, and this will support the delivery of your content. And finally, under audience engagement, it is very important for you to engage with other accounts. For example, if you're looking at social media platforms, if Brave Movement is pushing something, it does not hurt the Brave movement to, for example, let me speak to some of the partners we work with, maybe Safe Online. It does not hurt for us to support the work that Safe Online is doing. If they're doing this initiative, if you have social media platforms, like, repost, share, if you can comment and amplify the work that they're doing, then that would ensure that we are making progress. One of the things that, let me speak to the local reality here we have in Kenya. There's a lot of gatekeeping when it comes to even survivor engagement. I don't know what the status is. So we have factions that say, I do this, these are my people, and I cannot collaborate with them. And that really minimizes the impact. But if you're able to support others, then as you amplify their work, the message, the impact that you want to communicate also gets out there as you also build and support your brand with that. Yes, that is really under audience engagement. And even as we continue with this, if there are bits and pieces that would be nice for you the things that have worked for you and you want other people to see, you can just put them in the chat box and the audience will be able to see that. Then we'll go to crafting effective messages. So we really have this really amazing advocacy campaign, and we know that if it gets support from policymakers and the communities, it will create change. The thing is, how do we craft this to effective messages, So the first thing is be clear, concise, and compelling in your message. I think we're also coming from the bit where we use a lot of jargon to, ensure that the message gets out there. We're getting to a point where we communicate impact in the simplest of ways. Even that person who's not maybe gotten university or tertiary education, for example, is able to understand that bit. And as we looked at when we're looking at the previous slides, we said, your audience. When you're speaking in the boardroom, then you will use boardroom jargon. When you're speaking in the corporate space, we'll use all the corporate jargon. But then when you want to create effective messages to people that will speak impact, be clear, concise, and compelling. The other bit is avoid jargon, focus on the impact of your work. Very, very key. Many times we assume that if we use big words, like a word I see being used in so many platforms is leverage. Let's leverage on this, let's leverage on this to build, multi-sectoral collaborations and all that. I really love that it's one word that simplifies a lot of things, but many times the message gets lost in this jargon. So if your message can be as succinct and as clear as possible, that would be amazing. Then, of course, data and storytelling. Evidence-based data is the way to go. I mean, no one will believe you if you say 10 girls lack education and you don't have the statistics to back that. So always ensure that you're talking from an educated and an empowered point of view. And storytelling, a very simple tool that enables us to really create and showcase our impact very beautifully. And we'll be looking at storytelling as we continue with the presentation. And yes, as we move on to the next slide, this is just something I put up for an example. We have 3 messages. Kaylan, if you can just bring them all together. Yes. So we have a campaign on OXEA. OXEA is online childhood sexual exploitation and abuse. So we're trying to create an effective campaign message. Will we call it? There are 3 options that we have. The first one is naming the campaign Strategic Intervention in the Digital Ecosystem, an integrated multi-stakeholder approach to mitigating offline and cyber-facilitated sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment of minors. So that's the first bit. Second bit is parenting in the digital age, tackling sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment of children online and offline. And finally, the last bit is helping parents protect kids. I don't know about you. Those of you who have access to the chat box, perhaps you can write which one would be the best. Would you name it as the first one, the second one, or the third one? Because the first one really captures the bit of it, but there's a lot of jargon. Strategic intervention, I'm already tired. Digital ecosystem, oh my God. Okay, let's see it. When you go multi-stakeholder approach, cyber facilitated, so this might capture the essence of it, but it's really too long and it has a lot of jargon. Parenting in the digital age, very simple. And for what exactly? To tackle sexual exploitation, very clear, succinct, and you try to use language that is appropriate. Helping parents protect kids. So for what now? Does it really capture the gravity of OXEA? No, it doesn't. So I don't know about you, but for me, I think the second one would be a good campaign message, and many people will resonate on with that. So try to be as succinct as possible. The more the jargon does not support, it actually takes away from the main message. Thank you, Kaylan. We can move on to the next bit. Yes, storytelling for impact. Can move on again. Storytelling. When I was growing up, it was very common for you to find our grandparents and our parents relate to us information through their experiences. Many times you would get to understand what happened in the past through people's experiences. And when someone told you that, it built a lot of credibility. It built a lot of, it's like you were there. They painted a picture as if they were there. So storytelling is basically sharing stories and experiences. And one, besides building impact, creating impact, it builds connection. And the key elements under storytelling, we have the people, we have the challenge that we're looking at, and we also have the solution, and we have the data. And when you're using storytelling for impact, it's very important for us not to just focus on what happened, but also use real life examples. Many times storytelling is using real life examples. And if you can use real life examples, then that would add to the credibility of it, and balancing emotion with data to increase credibility. I know some of us have sat in places where, there's some people who are really passionate talkers, and sometimes there's no data to it, but because they've really spoken passionately, you're able to buy into it. But as effective communicators, we need to balance emotion with data to increase credibility. So for the next slide, there's a video that we're going to watch that you will notice has some of these things. Yes, the next slide is okay, Kaylan. Yes. So when you're looking at an ideal story, it needs to focus on positive change and movement building. It should be people-centered and data-driven. Cannot emphasize that more. It highlights growth of an individual or organization, and of course is engaging. So for us to see this practically, there is just one advertisement, I think it's in the next slide, that we just put together. And as you listen to the impact story, you can just pick one or two things that stand out for you, and perhaps you'll be able to just type it in the chat box as we, really rush through this and move on to the next bit. So Kaylan, take it over. You can play this.
I remember when I first started with oral hygiene with kids, 90% of them don't know how to use a toothbrush. We asked the children, how many of you brushed this morning? And their hands went up, and this little boy, his hand didn't go up. And I said, well, why didn't you brush this morning? He said, my brother was using the toothbrush. If I waited for him, I would have been late for school. So for us to be able to change a child's life, to be able to bring back the confidence about their smile, it changes everything about them. I'm sorry, I get a bit emotional when it comes to that. I want them to have a relationship with an oral hygienist and to know that this is not a scary place. We are not scary people, and we are here to help them. We are here to expose them to a routine of prevention. What makes me smile the most is watching the change or being part of the change or witnessing the change. For me, is phenomenal. Colgate has started the movement, and we are going to come back to you as a better person, and we are going to have a better smile on you, realizing that I got to effect that. I got to be part of the change for the child. For me, is unparalleled.
Sorry about that. I was muted. So just a disclaimer, I'm not promoting any brand. I've not selected this advertisement because I'm affiliated to this particular brand. But I came across this video during just one of the television screenings, and I thought it was very impactful. This brand really thought about their impact story. Their impact story is not just selling toothpaste with fluoride in it that makes your teeth like white and gives you a good smile. But then they looked at the impact, and they really thought through their impact story. And it does not look like it is bought. I don't know how your perception towards it, but as I watched this, they integrated the teacher. This is actually a true story of a teacher in the South Africa region. And part of what this company or organization is doing is supporting these kids. And I think one thing that got me was that bit where one child was brushing their teeth and they were late, and they were told the teacher they had to wait so that if they waited for their brother to finish, they wouldn't do that. It speaks to the core of, humanity. And you could see they were able to balance data with emotion. They were not too emotional. They were able to, showcase the impact of it. We're not just trying for you guys to buy the product, but in you buying the product, this is what you're supporting. So that was very cool for me. And I thought this is one interesting way of communicating impact. So under showcasing results and data, when you're presenting your data to your audience, I believe for this video, they would have decided to say 30 children or 100 children in this part of Kenya do not get access to dental hygiene, but they were able to put it in a video which actually spoke more. Use charts, infographics, use graphs to visualize your impact. And I will just note that as you use this, be very keen. Sometimes in our presentations, in a bid to ensure we capture everything, because everything is important, we have so many graphs in a PowerPoint presentation, and they're so tiny. Some of those descriptions are so tiny, and we just can't. So you get lost in trying to look at the the key and to master it. So even as you use graphs, ensure that your graphs are very interactive and people actually understand. For instances where you can showcase your data in very simple pictures, do so. Show your results, show how your results align with your organization's missions and goals. At the end of the day, we are not just collecting data. We want to see how this data relates to the work that we're doing. If you're working towards ensuring that all children have shelters for living, or all children have families where they are safe, then how does the data you collect impact the work that you're doing? Make it easy to understand, avoid jargon, avoid all those research things the research words we use. Sometimes you will need to point out some of these key things, but don't use the words as much as you would use it or in a research when you're presenting a scientific paper. So balance is key. And of course, combine data with success stories for context. People will be able to resonate more with the success story, and they'll be able to link it up with that data. And the data will actually be helpful as compared to just some results you're showing people. Yes, I think we'll move on to the next slide. I'm seeing there is a question from the audience. We're going to respond to that at the end of the slides. Yes, thank you for that question, and keep them coming. Then we are going to look at tools and platforms for effective communication. Next slide, Kaylan. In this digital world of today, there are so many places where you can communicate your impact. The other day, maybe I'm old school, but I found out there are platforms like Quora. I don't know if you've heard of Quora, where you can just ask a question and so many people respond with their answers. Someone asks, I have a what do I do to respond to ensure it goes, and those things, and people are able to answer. So how do you, in a world where you're really lost, spoiled for choice, how do you choose the right tools? When selecting the right tools, you need to remember, one, match platforms to audience preferences. Twitter will not be the same for let me actually use LinkedIn. LinkedIn is not the same platform as Facebook or Instagram. What you share on LinkedIn may not be necessarily the same things you share on Instagram. LinkedIn is more professional. It has that professional vibe. So if you want to communicate impact, then when it comes to the professional world, then LinkedIn is your place to go. When you want to talk about emerging trends and issues very quickly and get responses, we know that X is the place to go. When you want to showcase storytelling using photos, we know that Instagram is the place to go. So match the platforms with the audience preferences. There's some countries that actually prefer maybe WhatsApp, so it would be up to us to look at how are we able to match that. Ensure consistent branding and messaging across all platforms. Branding is very key. Like, for example, when I talk about the Brave movement, maybe the colors blue and pink stand out. And once people identify your brand with something, then hold on to it. Let it not be today we are feeling bright and blue, tomorrow we're feeling, green, and we, change. Let us be very consistent even in our branding and messaging. And the more you keep saying something, there's something about our minds that the more something is repeated, the more it becomes a reality, the more it sticks. So messaging is quite important. Ensure it is consistent. Then consider your target audience. What are the existing resources? We'd love to share some amazing content on LinkedIn, but do we have the resources for that? We'd love everyone to be informed, but do we have the resources for LinkedIn, X, Instagram, Facebook, and all these other platforms? Do we even have the capacity to post on these platforms? While communicating impact is important, it's also key to know this is how far we can go. Can we start with Twitter, then move on with LinkedIn and the other platforms? So it's very important. Consider your resources and capacity. And even if you just have one platform, Twitter, and you're consistent on X, you're consistent on X, and you're giving a consistent message, then people will resonate to it. So you don't have to be on all social media platforms for you to be impactful. Then the next slide, please, Kayla. When you're looking at digital tools and communication platforms, what do you look at? Why would we go for Instagram and not go for X? first of all, what do you want to communicate? You need to transform, we know that digital tools transform the raw material, which is the message we have, into understandable, consumable language that our audience can understand. So do you want to communicate, like, do you want to make a call to action? Is it related to something that maybe people on LinkedIn are able to resonate with it more? So what exactly do you want to communicate? You might want to showcase it in an impact. Will the impact be felt more as a video, as a photo? You need to use graphic design softwares like Canva. Do you need to communicate MailChimp? These are things that you first need to decide. What is it that I want to communicate? And now, how will I communicate it best? If you want to do like a newsletter, maybe Instagram may not be the best place, but MailChimp will be the best place. If you want to do like a really good graphic and you want many people to resonate with the photo, Instagram will be the good place. So first, what is your message? What do you want people to know? And you don't stop at that. As you ask yourself, what do you want people to know? Then what reaction do you want to people to have out of it? Then you now select it. Then this is actually just now, how do you select the communication platforms? We have social media, newsletters, press releases, you can have blogs, you can have policy briefs. Depending on the different audiences, you will target these different people. And there are more resources that you can actually check out online if what messages are best for social media, what messages are best for newsletters. If you're giving maybe a summary or a brief of what your organization has been doing in the past 1 month, a newsletter would be the best thing. But if you want to give a really quick update and you want really fast reactions, Twitter, which is currently X, would be a good place. So very key. How do you want to communicate it and what do you want to elude out of the people will enable you to see how best to frame the message. Next slide, please. Thank you, Kaylan. So many times we see a lot of things and we forget to measure impact. When we were starting the webinar, we said sometimes especially when you're doing research, we work with communities and we forget to go back to these communities and actually let them know that these were the findings of the research that we did. So how do we ensure that this talking that Noel is doing, this social media post that I'm doing, how do we measure impact effectively? One, you can collect feedback through surveys and responses, just finding out a simple question like, would you like, I've seen this a lot on Instagram with, there's a lot of influencer, the influencer space is growing. So sometimes they post, but many times, many of them take a break and they share what content would you like to see? Is what I'm sharing effective, or what are the areas that this content helps you? So it helps the influencer to know how best to continue communicating and framing their messages effectively. You can track engagement across channels. This is the most common thing I know we do. Every week we run to, Twitter and see what is my engagement, how many accounts have I reached and all that, and we get really excited. Then yay, congratulations on reaching a bigger audience, because we want the message to reach the masses. Many times we track engagement, we track the likes. I mean, I don't think there's any one of us who, when one post gets like so many likes, they don't feel nice. I think it's a psychological thing. Well, we don't post for likes and comments and all that, but there's just that bit where when you post things and you get engagement, you're really excited that people are resonating to it. So you track engagement, see what are the comments, go to the comment section. Can you, pick one or two things? But that's not the only way. That's really not the only way. Collect feedback, very key, and adjust your strategy based on the data. If people want to hear more of maybe justice, then maybe tailor messages to justice. How do you balance justice with prevention and healing? Adjust your strategy from time to time. And just important to notice that as you're doing this, it's important to always have a regular cadence with which you're doing all these things. And you'll be able to measure whether the communication you're giving out is effective or not. And yes, thank you. Next slide, please. Yes. we're almost concluding, coming to the end of this. And so after all these things, we've known your audience, you have the right message, you have the right tools, you are using storytelling for impact, and you're, measuring the effectiveness of the work that you're doing or the messaging that you're doing. What are some key things that are important? What are some key takeaways that would be important in for this particular session? Yes, the first thing, if you forget anything that we have talked about, please remember these ones. Number one, tailor your messages to different audiences by understanding their values, priorities, and concerns. I emphasize this a lot. There's a lot of cultural differences that we may experience, but go in with the mentality of, I'm not changing, or I don't want to do this, but I'm going to support and to strengthen what's already there. So tailor your message to that audience. Number two, craft effective messages. I struggle a lot with keeping things simple. There was a time I really thought the more the better, but I'm really working on becoming and improving on this bit. And I learned one key thing that I always look at. It is keep it short and simple. Just keep it short and simple. You don't have to marinate it with garam masala, with pilau masala, with pepper, black pepper, blue pepper, some dishes need that spice, and the spicier you get the flavor. But some dishes are already good. Like if you have a good steak, you don't need to, add so many condiments. Keep it short and simple. The simpler the message it is, the more people are able to relate. And impactful story, the third bit is that impactful storytelling is people-centered and data-driven. Even as you're trying to create change, let it center on the people with whom we're working with. And let us always have data to support this. It's good to want to create change, but let us understand the scope of and the gravity of the situation. So people-centered and data-driven is very key to when you're using storytelling for change. Then you should consider existing resources and capacity when using digital tools and platforms. You may not be able to post on all social media platforms, but you can, now let me use the word leverage. You can leverage on the capacity you have and post on those platforms. If you're really good at Twitter, you go with Twitter. If you're really good with Instagram, leverage on that and become the best in Instagram. And through Instagram, you'll be able to, move to Facebook and all that. And finally, be flexible, seek feedback, and adjust your strategy accordingly. There's a saying that says, no man was born a master from heaven. So yeah, every day is a learning process, and be open to feedback. If you need to adjust and change, do that accordingly. And finally, and I think Kaylin will really resonate with this. What you're doing is enough. Your audience will grow over time. Consistency is the key. Your account may not have 10,000 followers, and it would be good for you to grow, but what you're doing is enough. Whatever resources you have, you can use them to create that impact. Don't beat yourself hard that, oh my God, I'm not getting engagement on Twitter or on Instagram. What you're doing is enough. In fact, for all the communications people in this space, I need you to just take a moment and tap yourself on the back. If you're doing your best, what you're doing is enough. Keep at it, be consistent, and your audience will grow over time, and many more people will be able to get your feedback. So this is basically really the gist of it. And I think I will open up the floor. I've seen that there are questions from the audience, and I think I can respond to these questions even as we, finish up on the actionable steps. The first question has been, for option 2, there was a campaign message that we had 3 options. So someone is asking for option 2 of the campaign. How is it going to explain to those in the villages who don't know about this digital world we are in? So out of all the three, option 2 captures the entirety of it. Yes, it might not be actually tailored to the community. So one of the things that you can do for the person who asked this question, if your community maybe speaks a local language, you can translate it into the local language. And in the local language, you will use words that are easy for them to understand. So when you're talking about technology facilitated violence, you're able to explain it in a local language. This is what it means. Sometimes even in campaigns, you're allowed to speak the local language for people to understand. You're not tied to English or the Francophone countries. You're not tied to French or those who speak Portuguese. You're not tied to that. I know in Africa, we are very diverse and we have, diverse languages, and you're able to do that. If impact is going to be reached through you translating that, the better. Then the last bit, actionable next steps you can take after this webinar. If there's a campaign initiative that you wanted to do, or if it's not that one big thing, but you really want to convince maybe your friend to get you a certain gift for your birthday, you need to do some advocacy, yeah? So identify one, who's this target audience? Who will this friend be? And for this friend, you're not going to research the most engagements and audience demographics, but you need to have information about this person that you want to, target. So when you have information for formal campaigns, you will research about most engagements and audience demographics. This will equip you to now craft the effective message. How will you then communicate to this friend that I really need this gift because etc. So what do you want your friend to do? You don't want them to just know you want a birthday gift. You want to see the gift during your birthday. So ensure you craft it in a manner that is compelling enough for them to see that, hey, this gift may be, but I will get it for Noel. Then the last bit, communicate your impact. How do you share your message? Be strategic, determine how to share it, which platforms you will use, and which would be most effective. Is your friend maybe a direct messaging person? Text them. Be strategic. Are they very engaging during the weekends? Do that. During weekdays, maybe they are tied up with work. You don't want to add to that. So be very strategic. Are they normally happy on Friday? Friday would be a good time to send out that message. That is being strategic. Same for big campaigns. What is the best time to send it out? Then what platform would be best and what platform would communicate the most impact? So yeah, that is really it. And even as we draw close to this, I hope some of these tips are impactful and you'll be able to carry them on. If there are some bits that you would like for the rest of us to know, please, we still have about 4 minutes to go. You can share that in the chat. But as we continue, remember, we're not working in silos. We work together. Alone, you cannot change the world, but if we work together, we're able to create impact. So even as you look at communicating, how are you able to influence people and bring people together so that we create the good? So that if Noel is not there, there's someone else who already has the impact and they're able to communicate that impact. And I think with that, we've come to the end of this webinar. I've not seen any more questions. As I mentioned, this one was because we're recording it and we want other people to listen on. We were not able to have a one-on-one conversation, but hopefully we'll look at the modalities and the possibilities of having that. Yes, so I'll just check my chat box. Yes, just one last question I'm seeing is, what is the best strategy to engage local community? One thing I'm a firm believer is keep it local. Keep it local. As we are looking at creating change, I'm a firm believer in we have global goals, global strategies, we have global goals, but the most important thing is translating them to local solutions that actually work. So, for example, Sustainable Development 3 talks about ensuring that everyone has access to healthcare. What is the context of this local community you're working with? What are some of the areas in this healthcare bit that need to be changed? So identifying that is important. Maybe attaining universal health coverage will say maybe we need dispensaries, we need medicine, but look at your local context. What is the gap that is already there? What are some of the things that are being worked on to ensure this gap is filled? And how can you do that? So if you maintain a local mentality, if you have a global mentality, but then you're focused on implementing strategies that work locally, that will work. In Kenya, there's this bit we call, actually it's a tool for development called the bottom-up approach or the participatory approach, where you have this idea to benefit the community. So you don't just go into the community. You might be the smartest person and indeed you mean well, but the participatory approach demands that the community members have lived their lives all in this place, all their lives. They know their challenges, they know their problems, they know the solutions to these problems. So even as you are engaging with these local communities, we talked about research and data. Go to these communities in terms of this particular challenge you want to engage them in. What's the status quo about it? What is the current state? Where do you envision them to be? And how can these members of the community actually initiate the change? Many times you will not be creating it for them, but you'll be that spark that institutes change because you want this change to be supported. Otherwise, if you go there with your own ideas, which are actually brilliant and they can transform the world, but if the local community does not buy into it and see that it is by them, for them, they will not be able to do that. So as an impactful communication practitioner, you have to create a platform where you're able to plant this idea and with the support of the community members, let them own it and let it be by them, for them, so that even when you're gone and maybe you don't have the funding to continue with it, they're able to continue with the impact moving through. Thank you so much for even engaging in the chat. Really amazing. And yes, very quickly, there's someone who wants to mute and ask a question. Please do that. We have 1 minute to go, then we'll close.
Good evening once again. My name is Dr. Agrippa Banda from Zambia. What I was trying to, I posed a question in the group to say the campaigning the campaigning option 2. It was just quite okay according to the things you have just explained. It was clear. Now is that you find that some other areas, because this organization here, like in Zambia, there is also one which is related to end early child marriages. So for this thing to work out properly, like as you say, you do the survey, you collect the data first before you go in. Then you find that there are those places you find that children were abused, but you find that when they take that case to any police station or any victim like GBV centers, you find that those people who are victims, they won't get any help, like whereby you find that this person who has committed that crime is like a breadwinner in a family, so that you find that they will pay something whereby that issue doesn't go far, whereby people who have justice. So in that way, I think is in most cases because of how poor people are and how rich people are. Because in some other areas, you find that people, they are not, in terms of stability of accounts or finance. Yeah, so that issue is it's a challenging issue to some other people whereby they cannot face the law because of the same issue. So I don't know how you are going to make it so that people should have justice. And I know you have those solutions of healing. What you have the groups whereby they will come into it and they will do what they are being trained for. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Banda Agrippa, for that question. Very important. One of the things that we actually, in this space, particularly ending sexual violence, is the justice bit, where the haves, or those people who have power when it comes to money, politically, those people who are well connected, skip the justice bit. Even the perpetrators sometimes are people in positions of power, and we don't see that happening. So as we relate it to communicating with impact, because this is a scourge that is actually biting through community, is marked in corruption, mixed up with a lot of inequality, mixed up with do as if create campaigns and advocacy around that. How are we able to communicate to the community, to the policymakers, to ensure that when we have such cases, let me call them high profile cases, they face justice and they face it till the end. Honestly, it's a challenge that we've been having, not in Africa, and I know other places have been having it, and we will not be able to end it just in one bit. But if you continue advocating, identifying that the problem is in the justice system, where does the justice system begin? This is part of identifying our audience. The justice system begins from the police to when it's taken to the courts, to the prosecutors, the offenders, all that system. So how are we able to, these are different levels of change and you cannot impact all of them. So can we start a conversation? Can we start lobbying with the government, one, to look at the policing system, to look at the court system? How are we able to present this information? Will you use data to show that the more these people are not captured in the justice system, the more children we have the perpetration of violence ongoing? So it could actually be a campaign that we can, an advocacy campaign you can form around and see how are we able to target those people in decisions of power who are able to actually create impact in these spaces. It's quite unfortunate, but there is hope. I remain very hopeful that the more we keep on doing, remember we said we are doing a lot as it is already, and the more we keep at it, consistency, the more we keep speaking, and the more we decide as a society we are going to embrace everyone. I'm not sure inequality will ever end, but we're able to create change. I think, thank you for those questions and thank you for the engagement. We will wrap it up in this juncture. We're going to have more of this webinar, so please look out for other opportunities to join. You have been an amazing audience. And hopefully we can have such conversations, and wishing you a wonderful morning, mid-morning, afternoon, or evening from wherever you're joining us from. There'll be a recording for this, and I believe it will be shared after this. Thank you so much, and have a lovely time. Thank you.